total of 80 missing socks in SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. Gee, Patrick sure has the impressive collection, huh? While the golden spatulas are the real stars of the show and have a lot more involved when it comes to collecting one, most of the time, the socks are a lot more varied when it comes to hunting down one. Maybe there's a challenge involved, or maybe it comes down to just being a good sleuth. Even though they may be different from golden spatulas, that doesn't mean there aren't any stinkers. Let's go into some of the worst socks in Battle for Bikini Bottom and why they are just so smelly. Before we get started, in my worst golden spatulas video, I talked about golden spatulas in a pretty non-linear order, given it's easy to refer to them individually since they're all named. However, for this video, instead we're going to go level by level, and if there's a nasty sock to be found there, I'll be sure to talk about it. Alright, enough stalling. Here's the worst socks in Battle for Bikini Bottom. There are a whopping 14 socks in Jellyfish Fields, the most of any level in the game. With so many socks around, there's bound to be a few lame ones. But are there? You bet your SquarePants there are. In fact, there's one sock in Jellyfish Fields that, in terms of intention, is definitely up there among the worst. Gaze upon this jellyfish rock sock. This particular sock represents one of the most horrific, unapologetic instances of backtracking in this entire game. What you're intended to do is switch to Patrick in the following area, then trek all the way back here with Patrick to use a freezy fruit on the lake. Not nice. It's not like you'll be able to use a pause warp either. You have to take the long way. Luckily, this sock is hilariously super easy to cheese. You can just use this tree to bounce the sock. It does completely negate the sock's downsides, but I'm including the sock based on how it was originally designed. Unfortunately, as you likely already know, this isn't the only backtracking sock in Jellyfish Fields, and these ones can't be cheesed easily. Bowling! Bowl a strike to win a sock. All things considered, by concept, this is actually one of my favorite socks. It's a very, very unique challenge and makes perfect sense for the bubble bowl. The only major downside of this sock, and the reason why I'm talking about it, is that since it utilizes the bubble bowl, you're going to have to backtrack to it after finishing the Poseidon. Worse, the closest warp to the task still has you travel a bit to get back to it. The same can be said about this sock in Jellyfish Lake too. Unique concept that helps it stand out from other socks, but not only do you need to backtrack after collecting the cruise bubble, but once again, the closest pause warp still has you walk a fair distance. These are some of the only instances of backtracking in this whole game, and to be fair, I don't think the latter two are as egregious as something like Donkey Kong 64, but I still think these make the list since backtracking is still involved. Other than that, I think the rest of Jellyfish Fields' socks are fine. I don't have a problem with downtown socks. I think pretty much all of them are pretty fairly hidden, or at least have a somewhat unique challenge involved in collecting them. I guess if I had to pick one, it would be the South Door sock and the Sea Needle, but it really isn't the sock's fault. The only negatives surrounding this sock are just negatives carried over from Comeback with the Cruise Bubble, backtracking, cryptic, yada yada yada. A big hindrance with putting a sock behind this particular objective is that it may leave some players confused. With Comeback with the Cruise Bubble, you're at least given a hint that the objective is locked behind a future ability, but the last sock doesn't have a hint like this. It's possible many players will want to collect every sock on their first visit, but have no indicator that one sock isn't obtainable until later, which may lead to some unnecessary and wasted sleuthing. I'd argue it's the only dull sock in downtown, by result of its placement, but I don't think it's that bad. Another level I don't have much of a problem with. I'd say pretty much all of the socks here are pretty fairly placed. This sock on the castle gate can be a little tricky to nab since it involves scaling this tiki staircase, but I don't think it's that cumbersome. Don't got much else to say about these. Rock Bottom, however, definitely has some stinkers. Big shout out to this sock in the depths of downtown Rock Bottom, which the game just shows you for some reason. Some of the socks in the museum can also be a little annoying since you'll have to backtrack out of the area if you aren't playing as Sandy, but I think the worst of Rock Bottom socks are in the Trench of Advanced Darkness. This sock in the laser area is kinda hidden, but if you're going for how in tarnation do you get there, it's practically handed to you. It's a pretty lazy placement, all things considered, but I don't think any sock in this game is as lazy or as free as this one. It is 100% impossible to miss this guy, and there is absolutely no challenge involved. It's presented to you on a silver platter. It makes me so mad because Rock Bottom has a lot of potential for hiding goodies, so seeing one in a place like this is really disappointing. When developing BFBB Deluxe, socks like these were one of the biggest reasons I wanted to implement sock remix as a game option, such that the sock can have the opportunity to hide in a much more exciting, challenging, and rewarding location. Alas, this is Base Battle, and Base Battle has this sock in one of the most baffling places. Lastly, let's talk about this bungee jump. 2,400 shiny objects for just a sock? In this economy, having to pay a toll for a single sock and barely anything else is just plain frustrating, and the fact that this happens more than once is even worse, but we'll get to that in a bit. And here's the thing about this sock. I was already going to bring up this one for the price tag alone. However, I asked my followers what they thought the worst socks were in this game, and when I did, I received this very interesting reply.
If you get grabbed while paying the clam in the trench, the sock never spawns. This happened to me once on Good Payson. For that reason, it's the worst sock.
As soon as I read this, I thought,
what? What are you talking about?
I just had to investigate. And wouldn't you know it,
Holy crap, it's real!
allow me to explain. When you interact with this clam, there is a certain range in which you can initiate a conversation with it. The trigger surrounding the clam is positioned and scaled in such a way where you won't be able to talk to it if you're hanging over the abyss. However, if you use something like cruise boosting to fall off the platform during this exchange, it's possible that when you respawn, the game will be in a bugged state where the clam is paid for, but the bungee and sock are nowhere to be found. Here's why. When paying for the clam, the game activates two dispatchers, or flags. One flag is activated that sets the clam as paid for, which activates immediately upon accepting payment, but the second flag sets the bungee and its sock as available, which is enabled not when the clam is paid for, but when the bungee appears during the following cutscene. There is a roughly 2-second time frame between when these flags are set, so if the level reloads before the second flag is activated, the process is interrupted. Thus, when you respawn, the clam is disabled, but the bungee and sock are still unavailable, since the flag is never set and never will be, permanently locking you out of completing the game. It's a pretty nasty oversight, but it gets worse. You may be thinking, well, that only happens if you're cruise boosting, a speedrun technique. Surely this can't happen in a casual playthrough.
Wrong!
For most NPCs, signs, or clams in this game, encountering them for the first time will typically force you into a conversation once you get close enough. The trigger for these forced conversations can be different than the regular talk triggers, and wouldn't you know it, the forced conversation trigger for this clam toll extends over the platform's edge. It's entirely possible for this to happen if you fly into the trigger as Sandy. So in that regard, this is definitely a worse sock contender, hands down. The only real problematic sock here is, like Rock Bottom, the sock found in the Mermalair security tunnel that's locked behind a clam toll. Luckily, this one can't soft lock you out of completion, but every time I replay this game, I find myself getting this sock or the one in the trench near the end of my playthrough, since I usually have to prioritize other tolls first. At least the platforming in this area is somewhat unique and can be pretty challenging, but can we stop locking single socks behind these tolls? There's only so many shiny objects to go around. The quality of Sand Mountain socks relies on how they are incorporated into the slides themselves, with the exception of these socks in the ski lodge, which I think are alright. Having to destroy a Sandman these kids worked so hard on right in front of them is hilariously cruel, though I suppose this isn't the first time SpongeBob's done this. Anyway, Guppy Mountain is this weird sock where you have to walk through this non-slide section of the area, but I don't think there's anything actually wrong with it. Sand Mountain has it a little worse though. Gotta love these ice pillars, right? This is a genuinely brutal chuck placement, can't lie. Sandy doesn't have much air mobility when she's hovering, so if you start floating across this gap at the wrong time, there's nothing you can do to prevent getting hit by this guy. Then you're gonna have to slide all the way back down here to give it another shot. It's kind of annoying, but that sock doesn't hold a candle to the Flounder Hills Sandman. Whenever people bring up the worst or most infamous socks in this game, the Sandman sock is always part of the conversation. There are two central problems that stem from this objective. First of all, the Sandmen are located in such a way where it's impossible to take out all of them in one trip. You'll have to take a minimum of 2 trips down the slope in order to hit all of them, which poses the second issue. The Sandmen reset. each time you die. In order to nab this sock, you have to successfully reach the bottom of the slope consecutively, which is easier said than done. I think one of the most frustrating parts of this objective, and how Flounder Hill is designed as a whole, is this final section near the bottom of the slope. There's 2 sandmen down here on the lower layers, along with another sock on the top layer. If you want to grab absolutely everything this slide has to offer optimally, and prevent going down the slope a 3rd time, you'll have to pull off this risky, awkward jump to the lower path to hit both sandmen in one go. On top of that, make sure you have underwear to spare, because you'll immediately be met with these thunder tikis, which can be super hard to avoid since they're on an upward trajectory. Sheesh. I do want to give massive props to Rehydrated regarding this objective, since they actually incorporated the sandmen into a universal counter so that you don't have to worry about them resetting each time you die. Good change. Hi, Future Gravity here. So you know how I just mentioned how Rehydrated fixed this objective? Yeah, get this.
It's fiction. It's fiction. We made it up. We made this one up. It's a made-up tale. It's a total fabrication.
I played through the entirety of Rehydrated again, only to discover that despite Purple Lamp implementing a counter that looks identical to the rest of the level counters, gaslighting me into believing for nearly 5 years that this sock was made easier, it is identical to how it functions in the original. Fall off and the Sandmen reset once more, so I'm taking it all back. Anyway, back to the video. Now, with all that being said, I actually don't really mind this objective. I know, crazy concept, but I somewhat enjoy the challenge that's posed here. Genuinely, I totally understand the frustrations this sock poses, and I will admit, Rehydrated making the Sandman count persistent is refreshing and less stressful. Nope. But I'd be lying if I said I absolutely dreaded this sock each time I replay the game, but maybe it's just me. On to the next world. Finally, I can talk about this Shish Tiki sock. Your goal is to smash the full line of Shish Tikis with SpongeBob's Bubble Bowl. I think the only real problem with this task is that, given the nature of the objective, it's kinda unclear that a sock is tied to it. If you miss the sock in your playthrough, I can't say I blame you. Besides that, don't really have much else to say about Kelp Forest socks. I guess the Kelp Cave sock is a little too easy since you're working to the teleport box here anyway, but one could argue the box is part of the reward for finding this sock or vice versa, so whatever. There are only 3 socks that can be found in the Dutchman's graveyard, the lowest of any area in the game, but are any of these socks stinkers?
Yes.
The level's very first sock in Graveyard Lake promotes even more backtracking with having to trek back to the first area as Sandy, though this one isn't too bad since you'll be able to head back to the lake as Sandy after defeating the Dutchman anyway. Then there's this sock in the Graveyard of Ships. Now, a couple months ago, when I asked people what they thought the worst golden spatulas were on Discord, it sparked a discussion on what the worst socks were as well, in which Koopa Eliminator brought up this sock specifically. Now, in my opinion, I actually really like this sock. It rewards the player for thinking outside the box and taking in their surroundings. It reminds me of how the Donkey Kong Country games hide their collectibles in bonus areas. So, I was initially going to rule this sock out, but after giving it more thought, I realized something. When I played this game for the very first time when I was 4 to 5 years old, this was the very last sock I obtained. Straight up. So yeah, maybe it's a little too hidden. It can go on the list. Finally, we reached SpongeBob's Dream. The only socks I have an issue with are this one in Squidward's Dream, since you'll be forced to redo this section of the level, as well as this one in Sandy's Dream, which is pretty much handed to you for reaching the checkpoint. Though, to be fair, that one's pretty balanced out since it's heavily guarded by robots. The rest? Don't have much else to say. I think they're fine. Now, some of you may be wondering why I left Bikini Bottom for last, but I also feel a lot of you probably know exactly why. A handful of socks in Bikini Bottom are definitely some of the worst, that's for sure. For starters, the sock rewarded to you in Squidward's Tiki tasked you with destroying all of the cephalopod's belongings. I think this one's fine. Most players will probably do this to Squidward anyway, so a lot of people won't miss it. However, this same concept is repeated in the Krusty Krab, which has a whole lot more stuff to break, including these ketchup and mustard bottles, which, like, come on, really? This sock isn't horrible, but I'd argue easily missable because of how much stuff you have to break. There's also this sock behind the dumpster which I've heard people complain about, but in my opinion, no sock in this whole game quite compares to this final sock. Yeah, this, ain't great. I'm honestly surprised at how cryptic this sock is. There's no indication whatsoever this thing holds anything. At least with the TV and Shady Shoals, you're at least in motion to try and hit the thing. This statue feels like any of the other various details found in Bikini Bottom. Maybe it's just me, but it's the same kind of logic as finding a sock by hitting this sign or this tree. You get what I mean? What I'm getting at is that it kinda reminds me of how Super Mario Sunshine hides its blue coins, giving them to you by spraying, or in this case hitting, various course elements. I just think it's kinda unclear, I don't know. But you know, my slight disdain for this sock allows me to reflect on all the other socks throughout this game. Genuinely, it's nice a majority of battles missing socks are pretty fun to find, and the challenges that are tied to specific ones, like Wakatiki or bouncing up the lighthouse, are mostly pretty enjoyable. And I'm not sure if this is a hot take or not, but in my opinion, the worst of battle socks are certainly better than the worst of the SpongeBob movie's extras. If you know, you know, but that's a topic for another video. As for this video, that's all I've got for today. What do you think of Battle for Bikini Bottom's worst missing socks? Do you agree with my picks? Do you think there's any socks I may have missed out on? Comment below and let me know. Thanks for watching, and subscribe for more Battle for Bikini Bottom content. See you on the flip side.